Sit back and throw one back with your pinky in the air and a middle finger to the world, and join me, the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, as we look back on this day in pro wrestling history. But before we do, put that drink down, like, share, and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get our wrestling history on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is December 16th. And we're going to start off as we always do on a positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays. 1930, the founder of the Graham family, Dr. Jerry Graham. 1985, the luchador known as Psycho Clown. Of course, on the flip side of that coin, your pro wrestling deaths for December 16th. 1917, the man that started it all, Frank Gotch. 2000, Mexican luchador legend, Blue Demon. 2006, one of the greatest grapplers of all time, The Spoiler. In 2015, another legendary luchador, Lizmark. Alright, enough of the sad stuff. It's time to get to the meat and potatoes. That's right, these are your pro wrestling history highlights for December 16th. Jumping in the Wayback Machine and going all the way back to 1880, where we see John McMahon defeat H.M. Duffer in Boston, Massachusetts to win the American Collar and Elbow title, ending Duffer's second reign. Leaping 61 years to 1941, Black Guzman defeats Tarzan Lopez in Mexico City, Mexico for the NWA middleweight title. Making two stops in 1949, first, Vern Gagne defeats Leo Newman in Houston, Texas to win the NWA Texas heavyweight title. Our second stop in 49 sees George Flynn defeat Danny O'Connor for the Georgia version of the NWA Southern heavyweight title in Atlanta, Georgia. 3 years later in 1952, Fred Atkins and Ray Eckert defeat Ben and Mike Sharp to win the San Francisco version of the NWA World Tag Team titles, ending the Sharps' sixth reign. 2 years later in 1954, Ray Vilmer defeats Joe Dusk in Kansas City, Kansas to win the NWA Central States title. Groovin' to 1962, Mr. High and Mr. Low, Doug Gilbert and Dick Steinborn, defeat Art and Stan Nielsen in St. Paul, Minnesota to win the AWA World Tag Team titles. That next year in 1963, Edward Carpentier wins his second World Wrestling Association, Los Angeles, World Heavyweight title by forfeit when Bearcat Wright no-shows a title defense in Indo, California. 3 years later in 1966, Mike DiBiase defeats the Viking in St. Joseph, Missouri to win the NWA Central States heavyweight title for a third time. Grabbing my bell-bottoms and disco ducking it to the year 1970, where we see Bob Kelly win his second NWA Gulf Coast heavyweight title, defeating the Wrestling Pro in Mobile, Alabama. Staying in 1970, Bill Robinson defeats the Destroyer, Dick Beyer, for the Hawaii version of the NWA North American heavyweight title. That next year in 1971, Ole Anderson defeats Jack Briscoe in Tampa, Florida for the NWA Florida television title, ending Briscoe's second reign with that belt. Moving to 1977, the Canadian, aka Roddy Piper, wins his fourth NWA America's heavyweight title by ending the 11th reign of Chavo Guerrero in Los Angeles, California. Our final stop in the 70s, 1978. Bobby Eaton and George Goulas defeat Gypsy Joe and Tojo Yamamoto for the NWA Mid-American Tag Team titles in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Grabbing my boombox and going to the year 1980, where we see Jackie Soto defeat Nancy Kumi to win the vacant WWWA World Singles title in Tokyo, Japan, beginning her third reign. 3 years later in 1983, Mike Rotundo defeats Greg Valentine in a tournament final for the vacant NWA Florida heavyweight title in St. Petersburg, Florida. That next year in 1984, Blue Panther defeats El Matematico in Mexico City, Mexico for the UWA World Welterweight title. 2 years later in 1986, Bad News Allen defeats the Falcon in Orlando, Florida to become the final NWA Bahamas heavyweight champion. The title would be abandoned in 1987. 1987, the WWF held their second annual Slammy Awards in Atlantic City, New Jersey at the Caesars Palace. This was the infamous program where Vince McMahon sang "Stand Back," footage that still haunts many fans to this day. Our final stop in the 80s, 1988. Terry Gordy and Stan Hansen win the vacant All Japan Pro Wrestling Unified Tag Team titles for a second time by winning the 12th annual World's Strongest Tag Team League. Grabbing my flannel and going to the decade of grunge, 1990. WCW held their Starrcade pay-per-view at the Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis, Missouri, with a main event of NWA World Champion Sting defeating the Black Scorpion with a flying body press in a steel cage match. Dick the Bruiser was the special referee, and after the match, a slew of Scorpions attacked Sting and Bruiser. Barry Windham and Arn Anderson finally joined the brawl, and the Scorpion that Sting defeated was unmasked and revealed as Ric Flair. Those were your short but sweet pro wrestling history highlights for December 16th. I'm the Eclectic Gentleman Stephen Watts, and we'll see you tomorrow.